I walked into my childhood home after 3 years overseas, and the first thing my stepfather, who I'll call Gary, did was punch me hard enough to split my lip open, right after he said, "Welcome back." My biological mother just stood there, watching, silent. It sounds unbelievable, I know, but that's exactly how my homecoming went. My mother watched her husband assault me, and she didn't lift a finger. That moment, standing in the hallway with blood dripping onto my travel bag, was the exact point I realized the whole dynamic, the family, the history, everything I thought I knew, was a lie. The whole sequence of events that followed, the revelation of a deeply buried secret that cost Gary his job, my mother her reputation, and me my last shred of respect for them, started right there. When you hear the full story, I need you to tell me, was I right to burn down their entire life because they physically and emotionally broke me the moment I stepped back across their threshold? My name is Leo, and for the last 3 years, I had been working on a massive infrastructure project in Singapore. I'd left immediately after graduating college, desperate to get away from the suffocating atmosphere of my mother, Sarah, and Gary's house. Gary had been in my life since I was 12. He was a successful, though emotionally stunted, executive at a high-end financial firm. He was outwardly charming and charismatic, the kind of man who could talk a jury into believing the sky was green, but behind closed doors, he was a silent tyrant. His control was subtle, mostly aimed at my mother, but it had a chilling effect on the whole house. I was the inconvenient truth, the reminder that Sarah had a life before him. I didn't hate him, but I resented his presence and the way it changed my mother from a vibrant, silly woman into a nervous shadow perpetually seeking his approval. My father, my biological dad, died when I was 10. It was a sudden heart attack, and the loss shattered my mom. She remarried Gary 2 years later, and from then on, my life felt like it was walking on eggshells. I had always been close to my grandmother, my father's mother, Grandma Eleanor. She was my rock, the person who taught me to love gardening and history. When I left for Singapore, the hardest goodbye was to her. The day I boarded the plane, she made me promise to call her every Sunday and save every penny I could, in case you need an escape route, dear one. She was a shrewd woman, and she knew exactly the kind of emotional pressure cooker I was leaving behind. For those 3 years, I focused relentlessly on my career. I worked 12-hour days, saved nearly every dollar, and avoided video calls, sticking only to texts and the occasional 5-minute phone call with my mother. My Sundays were reserved for Grandma Eleanor. She never asked about Gary or my mother, she just talked about her garden, the local gossip, and always ended the call by reminding me how proud she was. My mother's calls, however, were always about Gary, his promotions, their new boat, or the renovations on the house. I felt disconnected, but I didn't mind. I had a plan: save enough money, come back, and buy my own small place, finally free from their orbit. The reason for my sudden return was a minor but necessary surgery I had to undergo. The company medical plan covered it, but they insisted I recover back home for 6 weeks, close to family. The company booked the first flight and paid for it. I arrived tired, jet-lagged, and genuinely optimistic about seeing my mother, even if Gary was part of the package. I landed, rented a car, and pulled into the driveway, feeling that strange mix of familiarity and foreignness that comes with returning to a place you grew up in but have outgrown. I let myself in, dropping my heavy duffel bag near the front door. "Mom, I'm home," I called out. The house was eerily silent for a moment. Then, Gary appeared from the dining room, holding a martini glass, a silk smoking jacket over his shirt. He wasn't smiling, but his face held that fake, performative warmth he reserved for business associates. "Leo, well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, taking a sip of his drink. I forced a smile. "Gary, good to see you. Where's Mom?" "She's around." He took a slow, deliberate step closer. "So, the company sending you home for a little rest, eh? Guess the big shot international engineer routine didn't last long. It's just a routine procedure, Gary, 6 weeks and I'm back on site. The project's ahead of schedule." I tried to sidestep him to get to the kitchen. That's when he stopped me, his hand clamping down on my shoulder. It was a gesture of dominance, not affection. 3 years, Leo, 3 years and the only calls your mother gets are about your success. "No, how are you, Mom?" "No visit. You think that's acceptable behavior for a son?" I pulled away, irritated. "I called every Sunday, and I work 60 hours a week on a different continent. I booked the first flight home for this recovery period." "Excuses," he sneered. His eyes, usually cold, were now alight with a strange, dark anger. You abandoned your mother. You left her alone with me. He spat the last part out, and it sounded less like an accusation and more like a twisted confession. Before I could process the weirdness of that statement, he raised his free hand and struck me across the face with the open palm. It wasn't a slap, it was a punch disguised as a slap, using his weight and momentum. The impact sent a white-hot flash of pain through my head. I stumbled back against the wall, my hand flying to my mouth. I tasted copper instantly. When I pulled my hand away, my fingers were slick with blood. I looked up, stunned. Gary stood there, chest heaving slightly, martini glass still in hand. His expression was a horrifying mix of rage and something else, satisfaction. Then, my mother, Sarah, walked out of the kitchen. She froze, her eyes scanning the scene, Gary, aggressive and breathing hard, and me, leaning against the wall, bleeding. She didn't gasp. She didn't rush to me. She didn't scream at Gary. She just looked at my face, then at Gary's, and then down at the floor. Gary, she said, her voice a low, warning whisper, the carpet. That was it. The pain in my lip was nothing compared to the seismic shift that happened inside me. My mother's first, and only, concern was the stain on the rug. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They were both monsters, and my mother was complicit in her own subjugation and my abuse. I had been planning my 6-week recovery. I instantly decided I wouldn't spend another minute in that house. I grabbed my bag. I'm leaving, I managed to say through my swollen lip. Gary laughed, a short, barking sound. Where are you going, Leo? You don't know anyone here anymore. I have my own money, Gary. And my grandmother. His face darkened again. Eleanor, that old witch. Don't you dare call her. Don't you dare tell her what happened. That command was the first significant crack in his composure. Why was he so afraid of his mother-in-law knowing? I didn't wait for an answer. I turned, walked out the door, and drove straight to Grandma Eleanor's house an hour away. She was waiting. As soon as she saw my face, she didn't ask what happened. She just hugged me tight, ushered me inside, and fixed my lip with a steady hand. I told her everything, the punch, my mother's silence, and Gary's bizarre fear of her. Grandma Eleanor listened, her face grim. He's afraid of me, Leo, because I know the truth about him, she finally said, her voice quiet but ringing with authority. She then explained something that changed my understanding of my mother's life and Gary's power over her. Gary hadn't come from a wealthy family. His first marriage ended in a devastating embezzlement scandal at a major nonprofit where he was the CFO. He was never charged, thanks to a slick legal team and a great deal of money that vanished, but he was quietly blacklisted from the highest echelons of finance. When he met my mother, he lied about his past, claiming he left his previous job for a better opportunity. My grandmother, through her late husband's connections, found out everything right before the wedding and confronted Gary. He was forced to sign a prenuptial agreement that stated if he ever physically harmed Sarah or me, or if his criminal past was exposed and caused financial damage to my mother, the prenup would be nullified, and he would walk away with nothing but the clothes on his back. Sarah knew about the past, but Gary had convinced her that the prenup was a sign of his devotion to her safety, not a sign of his manipulation. The only copies of the real, signed agreement were locked away in a safe deposit box to which only my mother and grandmother had keys. My mother's behavior suddenly made terrifying sense. She wasn't just nervous, she was terrified of him leaving and her having to face the truth of his past and her terrible judgment. She was protecting him, not the money, but the illusion of her life. So that's the situation I was in. I was physically assaulted by my stepfather, abandoned by my mother, and now I held the key to destroying my abuser's life and revealing my mother's complicity. Gary had hurt me and my father's family for years. Now, with a split lip and a burning sense of betrayal, I had to make a choice: let it go and simply recover at my grandmother's house, or use the information I had to hit them where it would hurt the most, their social standing and Gary's career. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have prioritized peace, or revenge? I looked at the prenuptial agreement, which Grandma Eleanor had retrieved the next day. It was undeniable proof of Gary's fear and my mother's knowledge. I couldn't just leave it alone. The man who had struck me, who had suppressed my mother for a decade, needed to face consequences. The first part of my plan was simple: get the hell out of their lives for good and secure my grandmother. I took the 6 weeks I was supposed to be recovering and spent them doing something completely unexpected. I didn't go back to Singapore. I flew back to the city where I was born and where Gary worked. I set up a meeting with Gary's company's chief risk officer Crow. I didn't go to the firm directly. Instead, I called the CRO's executive assistant, claiming to be an attorney representing a former business associate of Gary's who had vital information regarding a due diligence matter. Intrigued, the Crow agreed to a brief, off-site meeting. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room at a third-party legal office. I walked in, wearing a suit, professional and calm. I didn't mention the assault. I simply presented the Crow with a meticulously compiled file that Grandma Eleanor and I had put together. It contained the complete history of the nonprofit embezzlement, the non-disclosure agreements Gary had paid off, and several documents indicating that Gary had recently been transferring substantial sums of money from his joint account with my mother into a separate, offshore account, which was a clear violation of his company's policy regarding personal asset reporting for executives. I didn't say, Gary is a criminal. I just said, here is the evidence of his past and his current asset concealment. This is a massive compliance risk for your firm. A senior executive at a high-profile financial firm having an undisclosed history of financial misconduct and now moving funds into offshore accounts is a nuclear bomb for a compliance department. I made sure to mention the signed prenup that tied my mother's finances to his stability, explaining that my mother had been the one who insisted I share this information for her own protection. This painted my mother as a victim who was finally breaking free, thus protecting her from immediate legal fallout while ensuring Gary was the sole target. The CRO was pale by the time I finished. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, he said, his voice clipped. You'll be hearing from us. Less than a week later, the news broke. Not the news of the embezzlement, but that Gary had resigned effective immediately due to undisclosed financial reporting issues. The language was corporate and clean, but the message was clear to anyone in their circle: he was disgraced. They weren't just going to let him resign. His retirement account was frozen pending an internal investigation, and the firm was now looking into clawing back his previous bonuses. His life, professionally, was over. The aftermath was exactly what I had hoped for. My mother called, not to apologize, but to scream. You destroyed us. Gary lost everything. How could you do this to me? She sobbed over the phone. He hit me, Mom. You watched him do it, I said, my voice ice cold. It was a mistake, a momentary lapse. He was stressed. And now, what do I have? Nothing. You have the house, Mom. And you're rid of the tyrant. You have a chance to be your own person again. As for me, you lost me the minute you prioritized a rug over your own son's safety. I hung up the phone and blocked her number. Grandma Eleanor, using the prenup as leverage, helped my mother secure the house and a small stipend from the frozen funds, enough for her to live on and eventually sell the home. Gary was left to the tender mercies of his firm's legal team and his own crumbling reputation. He tried to sue me, but the firm's lawyers made it clear that any public legal action would only accelerate the exposure of his past. He vanished, presumably to some tiny, unextraditable country to lick his wounds. The cost was high, though. I lost my mother completely. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by a bitter, self-pitying shell who chose her abuser over her son. But in return, I gained peace and a new appreciation for my incredible grandmother. I returned to Singapore a few weeks later, no longer feeling the need to run, but feeling like I was walking toward a future I had finally cleared for myself. I still speak to Grandma Eleanor every Sunday. I'm going to bring her back to Singapore to live near me as soon as I can. The old promise she made me keep, save every penny for an escape route, was finally used, not to run away, but to secure my freedom and justice. I never regretted what I did. I protected myself and my grandmother, and I delivered a consequence to a cruel man and his accomplice. I know it was dramatic, maybe even vengeful, but I believe I was right. I am finally free. Like this video if you were on my side in this whole mess. Subscribe for more stories about justice and sweet, sweet revenge. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess. Did I go too far, or did I do exactly what was necessary? I'll see you all in the next story.